Unexplained.
Unusual.
Unstable.
Unseen.
Unlucky.
Unnatural.
Unsolved.
Unidentifiable.
Unbelievable.
Unknown. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Luis.
And I'm Naomi.
And we are the Unknown podcast. And today, we want to know if you've ever heard of the remote area of Marcahuasi. It's actually located close to Lima, Peru, in the Andes Mountains in South America. And this area is shrouded in mystery, particularly because of the huge granite rocks that fill the area. Their eerie resemblance to faces, animals, and religious symbols. There's a debate about whether the rocks were shaped as pre-Columbian civilizations, or if they were just naturally forming, as many archaeologists believe. But because these mysterious rock formations, the area is sometimes referred to as a stone forest, and there are plenty of stories and legends that have been passed down over time due to its mysterious origins.
One of these stories involves a patient of Dr. Raul Rios Centeno. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
All right. So what happened is a woman was exploring the area late at night with some friends on a camping trip. In the distance, they heard strange music, so they decided to follow the sounds and stumbled across a cabin deep in the forest that was lit with torches. Again, it's like the beginning of any classic horror movie.
It really is.
Because why
And
wouldn't you
would
go
think
out
that
in the middle of the
people-
night in the stone forest?
Right, you would think that people would know better by now.
Yeah, check out Cabin in the Woods if you
Yes.
really need a reason why you shouldn't do this. But anyway, the woman decided to go up to the cabin, and they looked through the windows, and the room inside was filled with people dancing. Now, this isn't really strange to begin with. Yes, it's in the middle of the woods, but, it could be a group of people. They're out, they're dancing. Who's to judge what other people do in the woods in the middle of the night?
Hispanics like dancing even in the middle of the woods.
Exactly. So, but this woman, being the nosy person that she is, decided that she's going to kind of bust into this party a little bit further. She looks through an open door of the cabin, and she realizes, and I don't know why this door is open. I couldn't really find a reason, but she realizes all the people inside are wearing 17th century clothing. Now, again, who is to judge? This could be maybe like a masquerade group in the middle of the forest. They're having a party in the middle of the night. Who knows? But she was alarmed. Is the whole point of this, is that you don't normally see that in the middle of the Andes Mountains. These 17th century costumes that they were wearing. So at that moment, she decided she wanted to join the party. She said she felt a weird, cold feeling that she was drawn to this group. So she starts to walk through the door. Now, this is where I start taking issues with her. Like, why would you randomly bust into this party with people dressed up in 17th century clothing? I mean, you're a little bit of a social bug, so maybe you would have had this inclination, but I guess you never know. But she reaches, about half of her body gets into the building, and one of her friends, who was duly creeped out by this whole event, she doesn't understand why her friend wants to join the party, grabs her and pulls her out of the cabin. This is where the story gets weird, because she immediately became paralyzed on the half of her body that entered the cabin, not the other half. Just the half of her that entered the cabin. So after this event, she never regained use of her body, and that's when she went to go seek the treatment of Dr. Centeno. So
he personally examined the woman and performed every test he knew to determine the origins of her sudden paralysis. His research in her case found it to be completely unique, as there were no discernible traumatic injuries or damage to her blood cells to indicate any kind of trauma that caused her issues. So basically, he had no idea of why or how this actually could have occurred, and using even the latest scientific techniques that was accessible to him, he still couldn't determine why. At this point, Centeno and his colleagues dismissed the case as an unknown affliction, and the best theory they had was that might be a lack of electric current transmission within her left body's hemisphere. But there's no explanation as to why it occurred in the first place.
And you see this a lot in medical instances where sometimes they really just can't find a reason why something occurs. There's a lot of complexities to the human body that we still don't understand, even with all of our scientific knowledge. So sometimes there are afflictions that just don't have a reason. So that's important to note, that sometimes doctors can't always find a reason. But continue.
Exactly. They actually recommended extended therapy at the hospital in hopes that it would cause her condition to improve, but they never expected to determine the root cause. And Centino published his unique case, stating that he firmly believed her entry into this anomalous zone produced a change in energy flow exiting her nervous system. So basically, it shocked her entire body into a paralysis state. And it was only obviously that part of the body that was on the other side of that doorway. And this case is seen as an example of the dangers of slipping into parallel time or dimensions, and how it can lead to distortions in the fabric of time, resulting in physical injuries to whomever experiences it.
And I would like to note that there was actually an episode of Star Trek Voyager where they did encounter an anomaly, and once somebody entered it, she actually couldn't talk, and she could barely move, and she became delusional to them. And it wasn't until they went all the way in that she was able to rectify that situation. So that's really interesting that came up in an episode, because as noted in this case when we were researching it, is they do say that parallel dimensions show up a lot in sci-fi because it's really great for a storyline, but it also, there are so many examples in regular human history that they like to expand upon that and what does that really mean. So I just thought that was really interesting that it actually did reference the whole, if you partially enter into some vortex that's not your own, it will mess up with your body's brain and chemistry,
because you never cross
until you
over
resolve it all the way,
path.
until you're completely into it. So in the other cases we've talked about, people were completely immersed in it and then came completely out. They weren't like halfway in and halfway out.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference in this case, because they didn't really, there's no official explanation of whatever happened to her. This case kind of dropped off the radar. There wasn't a lot of extended research on it after that.
Well, I could imagine that honestly people didn't want to talk about it.
So this is kind of similar. It links up to our case last week about the man from Torrid who showed up out of nowhere, and it was explained as a parallel dimension, basically, that he had no idea where he was at then, but he didn't see anything wrong. So it's very similar to that in nature. But we're going to also go over another case, which happened actually in the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a little bit further back. And I like these cases because it's before the plethora of the internet. And it was actually first published in 1851 by the British journal Athenaeum? Anyway, so that's really cool. This first showed up, and it was a published story in 1851. And this is a respected journal. It's not like fictional stories that are coming out. And it's about a man named Jafar Vorin, otherwise known as Joseph Vorin. And we're going to use Joseph because that's easier to pronounce in this story. Anyway, he was found wandering in a small village in the vicinity of Frankfurt, Germany. He didn't know where he was or how he arrived at the village, and although Joseph could speak a form of broken German, he claimed his native languages were Laxarian and Abramian. So basically, according to Joseph, he was from a country called Laxaria. Makes sense, but that's his native language. And it was located in a very well-known portion of the world called Sacria. And according to Joseph, his country was separated from Europe by a huge ocean. He claimed that he had been at sea. He was searching for his long-lost brother when his ship crashed. And when he was shown a map, though, he couldn't recognize his route. He couldn't find anything, and he didn't really know how he ended up right outside of Frankfurt, Germany. So...
During the villagers' discussion with Joseph, he actually said that he was a Christian, but he had practiced Ispatian, which I'm guessing is another religion.
It's a form of Christianity. So it had all the elements of Christianity, but with a different name.
Okay. So he also said that the world was made up of 5 great sections known as Sacria, Aflar?
Yep.
Astar, Oslar, and Uplar, which, if you know German, I'm guessing that actually sounds very German.
Well,
realistically,
it's really interesting though, because, and as we're going to note later on, if you look at it and kind of how our world is broken up and the beginning of those names, it's very similar to Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting in this case, I think, because again, when we mentioned in Torrid, it's like the world developed the same way, but there are subtle differences. So it's like all of the things were there. It's just they had different names. Christianity was told something different.
Yeah. So the authorities ended up actually taking him to Berlin for further examination. As far as anyone can tell, there was no official explanation as to what happened to the man.
So in this case, again, it's Joseph was from a timeline very disparate from our own, but similar in terms of structure. Religions of the world existed, but developed in different ways, and they had the things he was talking about were very reminiscent to the villagers. Like, it wasn't weird to them what they were saying. It had different names. Like, it just like he didn't know what to call things correctly, and that's where you get these similarities with these cases when it comes to these parallel dimensions, and that they're not thrown off. That's the biggest thing, and I find that most fascinating, is they're walking through a village and they're not thrown off by it. And I think that's the key difference, especially when you talk about the difference between time travel. It's that they're walking around a village and they think they're in a normal place. They may not recognize it 100%, but they're not thrown off by that. That's where these parallel dimensions sort of become really fascinating, though, because you would think that someone who arrived in an area they didn't recognize and they're talking to people about things that they don't really know, they would be thrown off. And these people are like, no, what are you talking about? I'm just chilling in my own world. What do you mean you don't know South Korea? Yeah. We're a major country. Why wouldn't you realize we were here? So I always find that really fascinating with these cases, that they're not feeling out of place or out of context until someone alerts it to them.
It's not out of time.
And they don't appear out of time.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool about parallel dimensions, and the fact that they literally just pop in out of another world, but that world is so similar to our own. The variances are very, very tiny, and it's not until you talk to them and get into the minutia that you start identifying these problems where the timelines aren't matching. So I find that interesting, but as we're digging into this, we wanted to go into what is the multi-universe kind of theory and where that comes from, because there's a lot of background to it.
There's a lot of different theories out there, and each of them you could kind of take with a grain of salt and kind of see where the interpretation came from. Mm-hmm. So again, we want to leave this open to everybody, and we want to give you what we think are possibilities that are connected with these cases. Mm-hmm. So again, these aren't just the only explanation. These are possible explanations. Mm-hmm. So if you think that you have maybe a different theory that could actually explain these two situations and how they occurred, please actually give us some feedback. Comment down below what you actually think this could actually be, or go onto our Facebook page and check us out on there and let us know. Start the conversation and tell us, look, I honestly think that this is this. Mm-hmm. And look at this theory behind this. Because there are so many different possibilities that it's impossible for one person to be able to go through all of them. So these are just a few of the ones that we really highlighted.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is really cool is there's actually a lot of science behind why this might happen. I mean, these are respected scientists, and they've done a lot of research to look at why might these occurrences be happening throughout the world, because it's like, all right, if we can't explain it, let's not dismiss it. Let's try to find a reason it could happen. And I like that. I like that you're not just, it's not out of nowhere. So do you want to go into like a couple of the reasons that we found?
Sure. So the multiverse theory, from science fiction to science fact, there is a concept that suggests that there could be other universes besides our own, where all of the choices you made in this life played out in alternative realities. The concept is known as a parallel universe, and is a facet of the astronomical theory of the multiverse. There actually is quite a bit of evidence out there for the multiverse. Around 13.7 billion years ago, everything we know of in the cosmos was an infinitesimally singularity. According to the Big Bang Theory, some unknown trigger caused it to expand and inflate in a three-dimensional space. As the immense energy of this initial expansion cooled, light began to shine through. Eventually, the small particles begin to form into the larger pieces of matter we know today, such as galaxies, stars, and planets. One big question with this theory is, are we the only universe out there? With our current technology, we are limited to observations within this universe because the universe is curved and we are inside the fishbowl, unable to see the outside of it. So what's another one that you would like to go into?
So there are 5 basic theories that we found that the scientific community kind of uses to explain the whole multiverse that happens. And one of them, the first one, is infinite universes. We don't know what the shape of space-time is exactly. One prominent theory is that it is flat and goes on forever. This would present the possibility of many universes being out there, but with that topic in mind, it is possible that universes can start repeating themselves. That's because particles can only be put together in so many ways. So the idea basically is that it starts repeating over and over again, sort of like phone numbers. Yeah. There are only so many variations. Now, it seems like there's an infinite amount of phone numbers, but in the end, they're going to start repeating, or they're going to be so close that it's all the same number, but maybe one difference. And that's the idea of this whole infinite universe, that it keeps going and going and going, but eventually it's going to start seeing overlap and similarities. Like the same thing's going to occur, and there'll be tiny differences. And that kind of plays into what we talked about, where it develops sort of the same way, but there are just minutiae differences.
And it sort of is like stacked up like a layers in a cake. Mm-hmm. So when you're seeing one layer, that might be the universe that we are in currently, mm-hmm. and the one right below it could have minor variations, where instead of the United States being a country of great importance, mm-hmm. it is France or Algeria, mm-hmm. or some random country that could be the potential superpower of that particular timeline. And I think that's where it's fascinating, because that's where we run into these issues of these alternate timelines, mm-hmm. and people coming and going from different countries and stuff like that are major countries in their reference.
The important thing about this first theory is that basically time and space are flat. And that's, and you know, and if you're not super into physics or anything like that, that can be a hard thing to wrap your brain around. But if you're trying to envision what time and space looks like as an abstract concept, in this one, it's flat.
Exactly.
And it just keeps going. Now, in the next one...
Hold on, before we go into that, because there is going to be a continuing concept in these theories, mm-hmm. is the whole thing about black holes. What are black holes, and how do they actually transcend into each of these theories?
Black holes scare me. I'm not even going to touch that right now.
So, black holes, actually, in this theory, are gateways into alternate dimensions. Mm. So, it's the gateway into that second layer, third layer.
Unless you're watching the really bad Disney movie, The Black Hole.
Yes. In that case, it's just a horrible time. So go ahead.
So the next one is bubble universes. And this one comes from eternal inflation. And it's based on research from Tufts University. And it says, when looking at space-time as a whole, some areas of space stop inflating, like the Big Bang Theory inflated our own universe, but others will keep getting larger. So if you look at it like the universe is a bubble, it's sitting on a network of other bubbles all around it. So the interesting thing about this is things could develop differently, including the laws of physics within these, because they're not a continued plane of existence. It's separate bubbles, sort of like if you're thinking about like a bubble bath, or when you're doing your dishes, they're sitting on top of each other. So they're connected in a way, but in the end, they are separate little universes of their own.
And I think that's fascinating, because TV shows like The Twilight Zone mm-hmm. have kind of tried to grasp this concept and this theory and actually put it into entertainment. Mm-hmm. And what they did was actually having, it was basically like little balls in a pool mm-hmm. game. And each ball represented a universe. I
think of it like that scene in Men in Black when we're all like in the marbles. It's sort of like that, where it's all like jumbled together, but they are different. They're different universes, but basically you're all inside, like in this case, the marbles were all inside a bigger universe. They were all kind of like building on top of each other, but they were separate in their own little sphere, if that makes sense. It's a hard concept to kind of wrap your brain around. Understanding space-time, I mean, the greatest minds in the world still don't understand it, so we don't expect anyone here to, in this little brief overview. But
and also that one, again, going back to the wormholes and black holes, mm-hmm. is actually the concept that you're able to travel between bubbles because they're connecting on certain points, and that's what's causing this suction between these two bubbles. So black holes are being portals between, again, mm-hmm. one dimension and another, or a universe and another universe, and that's how it connects together, each of the bubbles.
And I find these theories, they get ever more complicated as they are trying to explain what's going on, because the next one I had actually never even heard of. The other ones I had heard of in Big Bang Theory, actually, the TV show, like that's my limited knowledge. This next one I had not heard of, and it's daughter universes. Do you want to go over that one?
Sure. Daughter universes, or perhaps multi-universes, can follow the theory of quantum mechanics, how subatomic particles behave. As part of the daughter universe theory, if you follow the laws of probability, it suggests that for every outcome that could come from one of your decisions, there would be a range of universes, each of which saw one outcome come to be. So in one universe, you took you might have taken a job in China, or another, perhaps you were in your way, or your plane landed somewhere different, you decided to stay, and so on. So basically, it's very much like Back to the Future, where if you go back, you're actually creating another timeline because the events that you changed and altered actually created a whole other timeline.
To me, that sounds more like the butterfly effect.
It is.
It is, but in this one, it sounds like basically like it's the spawn off effect.
Yeah.
You know, like if you do this, it's going to spawn one way. If they do this, it's going to spawn another way. But in this theory, it does.
Yeah.
You did make this decision. So kind of like Sliding Doors, if you've seen that movie, you will notice a lot of movie references throughout this show. Sliding Doors, basically, it showed two ways her life could have gone, two very different ways it could have gone, but they're both happening in real time. Yeah. Like it was playing out at the same time. And that's what the hard thing about this is that it is actually happening. Any decision you made is still actually going on in another universe. You're just not living that one. So if you trip through another one, and there is a case I actually read about very similar to this. A woman woke up and her life was just slightly different. Her sheets were different. She woke up in like pajamas instead of her nightgown that she fell asleep in. And her ex-boyfriend was actually her current boyfriend, and the person she had been involved with, they had never even met. She woke up and she was in her life, but there were just tiny, tiny differences. And again, it was one of those things where the only way they could explain it was a parallel universe. But the thing about this lady is she never got to go back to her own time. She woke up in this one and she never went back. But she adamantly insists that she remembers it. It wasn't just a dream. She remembers being in this other life.
And that's where we get into the effects of like the Mandela effect and all that, where you actually see that people remember certain things and they've suddenly changed. So that's where this theory could actually hold for that effect.
Yeah.
So that's where kind of theorists have grabbed and said, okay, look, Mandela effect, this is the explanation for it and how it could be. So I think that was fascinating because I've never heard of that one either, honestly. Not the way that it was portrayed on this, and I was very fascinated by it. You want to go into the next one?
No, I really don't.
So the next one is
this is
very
getting sciencey for me. This is getting a little too sciencey. The
next one is very complicated. Another possibility avenue is exploring mathematical universes, which simply put explain that the structure of mathematics may change depending in which universe you reside.
I love when really smart people put simply put before something and then it's still complicated.
That's why I laughed. Because
it makes you feel dumb. That's not making me any simpler, but keep going. Sorry.
So this is one of those that I was like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole trying to explain it myself. I'm going to read right off. So if it sounds a little robotic, that's why. Mathematical structure is something that you can describe in a way that's completely independent of human baggage.
It's rough.
Yeah, that's just... And apparently it's Max Tegmark of Massachusetts Institute of Technology was quoted, "I really believe that there is this universe out there that can exist independently of me, that would continue to exist even if there were no humans."
So basically this is all about the science of universes can exist but humans have no actual impact on it. It's just pure mathematics. Yeah. Kind of random. Like, if this happens, humans have little to do with it. Because a lot of these rely on humans and their development is a lot of what I've noticed in these theories is a choice and free will and all of that. And that's what's influencing these different things. So it's taking the egotism out of it. This is just math. That you humans play a very tiny role in some other universe. Giraffes are the lord and master of the world. They walk around. Yeah, exactly. So long and thanks for all the fish. But it's basically saying, humans, get it out of your head that you are the catalyst of parallel universes, and it's really just the science and the math behind it. So basically, could be millions of other worlds out there that don't have humans, and they're still parallel universes. Humans don't mean anything about it.
Exactly.
Not very sciencey to take out the human equation.
I do believe that. I mean, if you think about it, in just statistic-wise, you're talking about how many planets out there can have and hold life. Right? I think it's 1 or 2%, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I could be very mistaken on that. I did not research that. But if that's the case, how many billions of planets are out there? So you're talking about maybe 2,000 to 3,000 based on that theory alone that have life. And if that's the case, then how many parallel universes might not have life on our planet? Yeah. Maybe our sun blew up already. Maybe our sun is a red dwarf already. And at this point, all life in our solar system is non-existent for carbon-based life forms.
Mm-hmm. And kind of like we were talking about earlier today is that, maybe it's Mars that would have taken it over if the conditions had been just a little bit different, or Venus. So it's really going into that, like tiny variations, which totally would have changed the skew of it, or they do exist, and the Earth is there and it really means nothing.
Yeah.
Something like that. But the last one is actually, it is basically called the parallel universes theory, and they do reference Hawking, if that gives it any credibility to it. But there is a math thing in here that I do not know what it is trying to say. But in a nutshell, it's saying that, again, time is flat and the number of possible particle configurations in multiple universes would be limited. And I don't know how to say this. It's 10 to something to 10 to something to 122 to be exact is what it says. But I have no idea what that means. That's very mathy for me. So basically it says there's an infinite number of cosmic patches. The particle arrangements of them must repeat infinitely, many times over, which means there are infinitely many parallel universes in which they're exactly the same as ours. So this one is saying that, like we said before, there are tons of universes and they are exactly freaking the same.
Yeah.
But because free will and things change and there might be tiny differences, there might be slight differences between them, but in the end, they're basically the same. And I think that's interesting to think that one tiny thing could be different and the rest of your life could be exactly the same. Because some decisions are important, some are very inconsequential, or some you might think are inconsequential and actually turn out to be really important. So this is an interesting theory of that, and it was, Stephen Hawking did reference it right before he died. He was talking about it. He says, "We are not down to a single unique universe, but our findings imply a significant reduction in the multiverse to a much smaller range of possible universes." So, I interpret that as he's saying there's only so many different universes that are out there. They're not everything in the entire world. There's going to be a lot of repeat happening if there are other universes out there because there's only so many ways things can combine.
Yeah, and I do believe that, but I think that it's... So I'm a very strong believer that when we live our life, there's a point A and point B. Our birth and death are predestined, and I do believe that. And then everything that we do is like a 12-lane highway. We're able to move around and choose our paths and choose what lanes we're going to go into. Sometimes if we get off the highway, get off on an on-ramp, or off-ramp rather, you're going to have to get back on the highway through that same ramp. So a decision that you made that impacted your life in a negative fashion, where you're completely pulled back and you don't move forward in your life, that is that off-ramp. And then once you bring your life back together again and you start living your life again, then it's back on the on-ramp and you're back following that same path. Now you have different variations and different decisions that you can make. You have that decision to go left or right, but every decision is going to lead to one result. And I think that's pretty much what this parallel universe theory is that there are multiple decisions in that path, and one decision can completely change your life. So if you decide to go on the first lane rather than the last lane, it's going to affect everything that you do in your life and how you move forward.
So where do you think that plays in, where if somebody, through accident or design, something happens where they missed where they would have ended up dying? Do you think it was predestined that they weren't going to have that happen? Or because you hear some people say that they had a premonition not to do something, very Final Destination is, but you've heard it in other cases, actual documented cases. They've talked about it with Titanic, they talked about it with 9/11, people who, for one reason or another, they didn't get on a plane, they didn't get on a boat, they didn't get into a car that crashed because they had a sense that something bad was going to happen, and they remember it. They remember not wanting to do it. They remember the strong negative feeling, and they avoided it somehow. So what do you think about that, how it plays into this whole, were they not destined, or do you think they avoided their destiny somehow?
I think it's that decision. It's that left or right decision.
What do you think about that idea that they had a
I don't think they were destined
premonition
to
that
die.
there was something wrong, but they were supposed to do this, but they had a strong premonition that something bad was going to happen and they wouldn't survive that incident, and they avoided it. So I'm asking you, do you think that is kind of it's telling to this whole idea that there is a destiny to your life, but maybe somehow in a parallel universe moment, suddenly you had a recollection that something was going to happen, that you were supposed to die in that moment, and you were able to dodge it in a different universe?
I do believe that. I don't think that when something like that occurs, I do believe that they were never destined to die. And that's why the universe autocorrects, because you're talking about millions, in some cases thousands of threads that lead up to one event occurring. In the case of an airplane, how many malfunctions would it take for an airplane to come down? So it had to have been, it's very much like Final Destination, that you see all these little tiny events that lead up to that one death. That one thing, that oil that drops into the road, and then the what do you call it, the spark plug, and this and that, and all that engages into one thing.
When you have those cases, those very well documented cases where somebody says that they woke up knowing that they could not do something because they knew it would have a bad thing, and then something bad does happen. You know, they sometimes say hindsight is 20/20, and they could be just, you know, like they, for whatever reason, they didn't go, and then they realize and they build upon it later on that, oh, I knew I had a premonition. But I think the people where they woke up and they knew something was going to happen, they had a dream, they knew to avoid that event. I do think it's an example of that parallel universe thing where somehow you have been triggered by something else where you knew something was going to happen.
Yeah. And
you were able to avoid it because of something else happened. Something else overlapped and gave you that premonition of what you needed to know. Because I believe in being very psychically in tune with things, and sometimes there are some people who
have that premonition
because of all these different, if you believe, especially that bubble theory where it's all happening but they're kind of bombarding on top of each other, or even just in the infinite spectrum where they're all happening and playing out at one time. You know, if Titanic, if her sister ship hadn't gotten crashed, she would have left earlier. Maybe she would have crashed anyway in the Atlantic, and maybe you had a premonition from that because of that variation. You know what I mean? Something like that. So to me, it's very fascinating that you can avoid it, and you have people who do have that strong sense that something bad is going to happen, because I think there's no other explanation when you wake up and you just know and you've avoided it, you've saved your life somehow. I think there's no other explanation than you somehow got into it from another universe that was going to happen, that something was going to happen.
Okay. I want to hear what you guys think, honestly. Audience members, please join the conversation on our Facebook page on Man Bites Media on Facebook, and check out the last thread that we set up for each of these episodes, and have a conversation. What do you believe about your start and end of life? Is it something that we can alter, or in every single alternate dimension there is the same end and the same beginning?
Well, you know what they say, the only thing that's guaranteed is death and taxes.
Yeah.
Everything else is up for interpretation.
Exactly. So thank you guys for joining us on this episode, and please stay tuned next week for another episode of The Unknown.
Dun, dun, dun.
My name is Luis.
My name is Naomi.
And we are The Unknown Podcast.
Dun, dun, dun.